Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting of the Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission to order. It is Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025. We do have some members attending in person and some members attending online. I and Representative Noor, Representative Pinto, Representative Anderson are here in person, and the other members are attending remotely. And I'd like to welcome you to the meeting today. Before we start, I just would like to acknowledge, and maybe if we could take a moment to just reflect, since our last meeting last year, we've certainly experienced a lot of difficult challenges legislatively and in our greater community. And I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the tragic events in June when we suffered the loss of our Speaker Emerita, Melissa Hortman. Her husband suffered also injuries suffered by my colleague, Senator Hoffman, and his wife. And also acknowledge the tragic events of last week in Minneapolis at Annunciation School. It has touched, both events have touched many of us in very, dramatic ways. And our communities definitely have been greatly impacted. So if we could just take a moment to acknowledge that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And now I would like to ask Ms. Schnabel if you could please take the roll.
Senator Wickland.
Present.
Wickland, present. Representative Anderson.
Present.
Anderson, present. Senator Dames.
Present.
Dames, present. Senator Marty.
Present.
Marty, present. Representative Noor.
Present.
Noor, present. Representative Perryman.
Present.
Perryman, present. Representative Pinto.
Present.
Pinto, present. Senator Pratt.
Present.
Pratt, present. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And just a housekeeping item for those of us in the room. Make sure that you do turn your mic on when you wish to speak. And since we do have new members to the commission beginning now, I'd like to start by having commission members please introduce yourself. And maybe we could start to my right, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Dave Pinto from the southwest part of St. Paul. This is my first meeting. I'm really happy to be on the commission, and I'm in my sixth term in the House. I've worked in the HHS and education, public safety areas in particular, and really glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Mahmoud Noor, representing South and Southeast Minneapolis. I've been a member of the commission since its inception, so I'm glad to be back.
And Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Representative Patty Anderson. I'm in my second term. I represent kind of northern Washington County. I'm on the taxes, transportation, the audit commission with Representative Pinto, and the fraud committee. And now this. So thank you.
Thank you. And if we could have the online members, how about starting with Representative Perryman?
Good morning. My name is Representative Bernie Perryman. I serve District 14A, which is South St. Cloud, Waite Park, St. Augusta, and St. Joe. I also serve on the Commerce Committee and all the Health Committee. And this is my second term. And I'm very thrilled to be put on the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now let's go to Senator Dames.
Senator Gary Dames. I live in Redwood Falls. I'm in my 15th year in the Minnesota Senate. I represent Senate District 15, which includes Brown County, Redwood County, Yellow Meadows, and Lacaparo. And then it also includes part of Blue Earth County and part of Chippewa County and then Lyon County.
Thank you. Senator Marty.
Hi, I'm John Marty. I live in Roseville and represent 5 cities in northern Ramsey County and chair of the Senate Finance Committee, and glad to be on the commission again.
And Senator Pratt.
Senator Eric Pratt represents Senate District 54, which is most of Scott County, the communities of Prior Lake, Shakopee, Jordan, and 4 townships. I'm also on I'm the Republican lead on the Jobs or the Finance Committee, also serving on jobs and bonding.
Thank you. And I'm Melissa Wickland. I'm state senator representing Bloomington, Richfield, and part of Minneapolis. And I am continuing on the commission. I have been on the commission now for the past few years, and it's been interesting in my work as chair of the HHS committee, because we do have a great deal of volume of fiscal notes that come through that committee. So it has been very educational, and look forward to continuing the work. Next, I would like to move to review and approve the minutes from October 16th, 2023. The minutes of the last meeting are either in your packets here or are posted online, members. Are there any corrections, or can someone make a motion to approve the minutes?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you. And
Madam Chair,
any other-
I'm just going to abstain since I was not there.
Okay. Any other comments or questions about the minutes?
This is Senator Dames. I'll also abstain because I was not there.
Okay, thank you. And not hearing any other questions or comments, we'll take a voice vote. All those in favor or approval of the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion does prevail and the minutes are approved. Next, I would like to move to the election of chair and vice chair. And I would welcome a motion to elect a chair.
Senator Wickland.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. I think it's important. This is a nonpartisan, bipartisan, I guess, commission, and we should get back on the schedule that we were originally supposed to be on, where we rotate the chair between the parties in the 2 houses. So to that end, I'd like to nominate Representative Noor as chair.
Representative Noor is nominated. Are there any other nominations? And I hear no other nominations. Representative Noor is put forward as nomination for chair. Let's see if are there any questions or discussion? If not, if Ms. Schnabel, if you could please take the roll.
Senator Wickland, if you give me one moment, we're having an issue with the live stream. No, I sincerely apologize. 1 minute.
Madam Chair, should we confirm that Representative Noor accepts the nomination?
Oh, I suppose that would be good. I just was making this assumption. So Representative Noor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members. I will accept the nomination.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. And we are just waiting a moment to see if our live stream is working correctly.
Up and running in about 30 seconds.
Okay, we'll pause a moment to get that started so we don't, so people who wish to follow the proceedings can see it.
Oh, okay.
With Representative Noor accepting the nomination, Ms. Schnabel, if you could proceed to a roll call.
Senator Wickland.
Yes.
Wickland votes Noor. Representative Anderson.
Yes.
Anderson votes Noor. Senator Dames.
Yes.
Dames votes Noor. Senator Marty.
Aye.
Marty votes Noor. Representative Noor.
Noor votes Noor.
Noor votes Noor. Representative Perryman.
Perryman votes Noor.
Perryman votes Noor. Representative Pinto.
Noor.
Pinto votes Noor. Senator Pratt.
Yes.
Pratt votes Noor. Madam Chair, 8 votes for Representative Noor.
Thank you. And with that, 8 votes in support of Representative Noor as chair. He is elected as the chair of the Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission. And before I turn it over, maybe I can continue and we can do the vice chair election. Are there any nominations for vice chair? And this would be a role that is going to be served this term by a Senate member. And are there any nominations for?
Madam Chair, Senator Dames,
Senator.
and I will nominate Senator Eric Pratt.
Senator Pratt is nominated. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, Senator Pratt, are you willing to accept the role of vice chair?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Senator Pratt accepts. Any other discussion? Hearing none, if Ms. Schnabel, if you could take the role on the role of vice chair.
Senator Wickland.
Pratt.
Wickland votes Pratt. Representative Anderson.
Pratt.
Anderson votes Pratt. Senator Dames.
Pratt.
Dames votes Pratt. Senator Marty.
Pratt.
Marty votes Pratt. Representative Noor.
Noor votes Pratt.
Noor votes Pratt. Representative Perryman.
Perryman votes Pratt.
Perryman votes Pratt. Representative Pinto.
Pratt.
Pinto votes Pratt. Senator Pratt.
Yes.
Pratt votes Pratt. Madam Chair, 8 votes for Senator Pratt.
Thank you. With 8 votes supporting Senator Pratt, he is elected to be the vice chair. And with that, I will turn it over now, the meeting over to Representative Noor to take on the rest of the running the rest of the meeting and responsibilities as chair. So thank you, Representative Noor, for taking this on.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I just wanted to say thank you for entrusting me with this role. I understand we have got a lot of work to do. And given that we're getting started, I commit to you that we will continue having conversation in terms of making sure that the Legislative Budget Office is functional and to be able to serve the purpose that it's intended for. With that, I think we have got few agenda items, and I will turn it over to I'll turn it over to Mr. Larson to walk us through and also to be able to give us more information about the LBO. Mr. Larson, please state your name and your title for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Christian Larson, Director of the Legislative Budget Office.
Please proceed.
Amanda, are we able to pull up the slides? Thank you. So we'll be walking through a couple presentations today, the first of which is really just highlighting briefly the roles and responsibilities of the Legislative Budget Office and the roles and responsibilities of the Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission. I'll pause at the end of this first part of the presentation and see if there's any comments or discussion or questions from the commission. Excuse me, let me just fix it on my screen. All right, so there's really 3 primary statutory obligations of the Legislative Budget Office. The first of those being overseeing and coordinating the fiscal process. Fiscal notes are governed through a number of different statutes and through other core documents. The first of those being Minnesota Statutes 3.98. And Minnesota Statute 3.98 is just the overarching establishing statute for fiscal notes. It says high level, here's who can request a fiscal note, and here's what needs to be in a fiscal note at a very high level. Minnesota Statute 3.8853 is the establishing statute for the Legislative Budget Office and really states how we interact as the Legislative Budget Office with the fiscal note process. Minnesota Statutes 13.64 is related to the data associated with unofficial and classified unofficial fiscal notes. And the Fiscal Note Uniform Standards and Procedures is the core document that oversees the fiscal note process. And that is, we'll talk about that more in a moment because that's one of the core functions of the Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission is to approve those standards for fiscal notes. And this is all Probably not new for any of you, but just to kind of set the standards, stage for what we'll be working on in the coming year as a commission. Fiscal notes are really answering the question, what is the fiscal effect to the state budget of a piece of proposed legislation? So that's the core function of a fiscal note. If we think about how that process generally operates, and how we fit into that, and then the goals for the office, then just kind of walking through that process. Fiscal note originates at a finance committee in the legislature. The chair of a finance committee, or the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, or the chair of the Senate Finance Committee have the authority to request a fiscal note. In practice, that really gets passed on to fiscal analysts, because they are the ones that have access to what's called the fiscal note tracking system. The fiscal note tracking system is just a technology solution we have that facilitates the fiscal note process. So fiscal analysts will go in on behalf of the chair, make request to a fiscal note, and that comes to the legislative budget office, and we say, okay, we're going to go review that language, determine what state entities are impacted, and that's going to get assigned to those impacted state entities. And then that's the next stage, is really where the vast majority of time and work of a fiscal note takes place, in the sense that agencies and state entities are building assumptions, they're building estimates based on those assumptions. And once they're comfortable with building that estimate, then they submit that to the legislative budget office. And then we're going to review and make sure that those estimates meet the standards set for fiscal notes. Oftentimes there's a lot of back and forth between the agency and the legislative budget office. We're trying to verify and validate the source of the data. Do those assumptions make sense? Just things of that nature, to make sure that what we're coming forward with is accurate estimates and fiscal notes. And then once we get to a point that we are comfortable that the fiscal note meets the standards set for fiscal notes, we then approve that, and that gets released to the legislature. And if we think about the main goals for a fiscal note, then it's really, is the estimates provided accurate? Is the information provided complete and understandable? And are they timely? Are we responding in a way that meets the needs of the legislature? So those are kind of the three core needs of a fiscal note. The one thing I want to add to that, in terms of kind of cases with new state entities, when a new state entity is created, oftentimes the legislative budget office is the group that creates the estimates for those new state entities. If we think of the last several sessions, we think about Cannabis Expungement Board, Office of the Inspector General, other numerous boards, commissions, task force, anything that's new. Sometimes that'll go to an agency that's really well positioned to complete those. Otherwise, will fall to our office, and we complete those. And so that's kind of the general process of a fiscal note. We'll talk more about numbers and statistics and of how many and things of that nature a little bit later in the presentation. But that's just a high level. Here's the responsibility of the LBO, is overseeing that fiscal note process. The second thing the LBO does is manage the local impact note process, and that's managed through Minnesota Statute 3.986 to 3.989. And a local impact note is answering the same question: what's the fiscal effect of a piece of proposed legislation? But in this case, we're talking about local units of government. So what's the fiscal effect to cities, townships, counties, and school districts? And then the process is quite a bit different from a fiscal note process. The fiscal note, we are reaching out to the state entities impacted, saying, hey, what does this cost you? We're taking that, reviewing those estimates to make sure they're reasonable and in compliance with fiscal note standards. And then that gets passed on to the legislature. A local impact note, we're really collecting information, and the LBO is developing the estimates and putting together a report and providing it to the legislature. So we're doing much more of the developing of estimates, as opposed to reviewing and overseeing and making sure we're in compliance with a set of standards. We'll talk about kind of resources that go into local impact notes a little bit later in the presentation, but that's, again, talking about the core function of the office, overseeing that local impact note process. And the final statutory obligation of the LBO is to provide the professional and technical support to the Tax Expenditure Review Commission. The Tax Expenditure Review Commission is governed under Minnesota Statute 3.8855. That's the governing statute for the Tax Expenditure Review Commission. And we play a role of providing the analysis, research, administrative support, report writing, things of that nature on behalf of that commission. And we'll talk about more in a minute of kind of the role of the LBO and how it relates to the TURC, or what we call the TURC, Tax Expenditure Review Commission, and how we relate to the Oversight Commission. But man, if you want to go to the next slide now. So the Legislative Budget Office Oversight Commission also has three primary statutory responsibilities. And the first of those is to review the work of the LBO, to make recommendations to improve the office's ability to fill its duties. So as you guys move forward, your job will really be to say, what's the LBO doing? Is it doing it in a way that really is useful to the legislature? Is there a way to strengthen that? Is there other things we need from the office? Things of that nature, really reviewing our work and providing feedback and providing support and making sure that we are able to provide what the legislature needs. You also have the responsibility to appoint the director of the LBO. The LBO director serves a 6-year term. And when that position's open, then it goes, a public process happens, and on behalf of the commission moves forward and makes a hire of a new director. And finally, the commission has the responsibility to approve the fiscal note uniform standards and procedures. And again, this is that core document that governs fiscal notes. It's giving both the expectation what's in the fiscal note and to some extent the processes and procedures to facilitate that. The fiscal note standards and procedures were originally approved in the fall of 2019, and they've been updated every 1 or 2 years after that. The commission will then review what's in there. Sometimes the LBO will come forward with suggested changes. Fiscal staff from the House and Senate will come with suggested changes. Members certainly will come forward with suggested changes. The executive branch might have ideas how to strengthen or improve the fiscal process. So that'll be something that the commission oftentimes comes forward with, reviews the standards and reviews any possible changes to that. And then I want to just kind of highlight, come back to this idea of like, what is the role with the LBO as it relates to the Oversight Commission and comparison to the Tax Bench Review Commission, as we serve differently in both those bodies. Again, the Oversight Commission is really serving that oversight role. And so we will certainly present to you about what's happening with the Tax Bench Review Commission, how we're utilizing resources and how that impacts the office. But we are doing the work related to the TURC on behalf of that commission. So they'll come forward and say, we really want to review this tax expenditure. We'll go on forward and do that research. The Oversight Commission, we're not really responding to your request for work, but rather you're reviewing our work and saying, is that meeting the needs of the office? Are you meeting your statutory obligations? Is there other things from the office that's working now or whatever else it might be? And so I just wanted to clarify that as we think about how the LBO interacts with these two different commissions. And from there, I will be happy to pause for any questions or comments from the commission.
Members, any question for Director Lassen? Just wanted to get clarity of who is ultimately responsible for the fiscal note. Is it the agencies or is it the LBO, and how does that interaction really happen?
Yeah, Chair Noor, thanks for the question. So really it's a partnership. So the agencies are the ones developing estimates. And so they're putting together a set of assumptions that say, this is how we think it will be, how this bill will be implemented, and therefore will result in these types of costs. The Legislative Budget Office has the responsibility to make sure those estimates meet the standards set for fiscal notes. And so it's our responsibility to make sure that we're not releasing an approved fiscal note to the legislature without it saying that it meets those standards that are set, again, approved by the Oversight Commission for a fiscal note. And so it's really a partnership that the state entity assigned to the note is developing the estimates. It's the LBO's responsibility to make sure that whatever is provided to the legislature does meet standards set forth.
Thank you so much, Director Lassen. On the other question is the fiscal note uniform standards and procedures. What role does this commission really play into developing that, and how much independent are we to really make changes that are necessary that will require response from the agencies?
Chair Noor, thank you again for the question. So the commission has the authority to set the standards for fiscal notes. Now, there is some limitations in that there's statute that governs fiscal notes as well. And I think the answer then is to, within what's in statute, the uniform standards and procedures have to certainly meet what's in statute. They can't go beyond what's in there, but it can define, give clarity within the bounds of that statute, can make direction and establish expectations around fiscal notes.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Pratt.
Thank you. I'm trying to find my little raise hand icon. I was having a hard time. Mr. Larson, you and I have talked, and maybe we can talk a little bit about your responsibilities. We had a rather bipartisan concern back in 2024. This body was supposed to get together and review that fiscal note from DEED. We did have a hearing in 2025 in the Senate Finance Committee around that. You know, my concern is around the authority that you have, particularly when it comes to a fiscal note. And I think you said it's not your responsibility is to review the assumption. what I got out of that was ultimately it's the legislature's role to decide to move or not move on that fiscal note. I guess we have the ultimate authority to approve or reject that. And is that a fair summary of kind of the role and responsibility of your department and the role of the legislature when it comes to fiscal notes and when there are problems with them?
Director Larson.
Sorry, Chair Noor and Senator Pratt. Yes, again, the responsibility of the Legislative Budget Office is to independently review a fiscal note to make sure it meets the standards set for fiscal notes. And so when we get to a point that we believe it's reasonable, that the assumptions are based on solid information, that is a reasonable estimate for a note, and that it's clear and understandable, then we will approve that fiscal note based on the standards set in the Uniform Standards and Procedures. Fiscal notes are not binding for non-forecasted related programs. And so the legislature has the authority to act or not act on those fiscal notes. When it is a forecasted program, they do become binding. And I would say the one thing I think to think about the process around fiscal notes is having an independent body review that should hopefully give some credence to what is provided. But certainly in the end, it is not a binding document for non-forecasted programs. And so the legislature does have the authority to use the fiscal note as information to support their work.
Senator Pratt.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, when I think back to what the problem we had with DEED and how they made some assumption changes that I think that caused bipartisan concern almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that it really, you know, we've all complained about fiscal notes. If it's, you know, we've even talked about the death by fiscal note, where, you know, something that the agency doesn't want to do, they load it up with costs. And I know Senator Dibble and I have had conversations around death by fiscal note. Ultimately, I think, and I'd like some more discussion in this committee around the role of the legislature to push back. We're never going to make this a better process until we exert our authority and refuse to move legislation until these fiscal notes are in appropriate order. Or, I don't know, Mr. Larson, do we have the authority to change what gets, or maybe this is a Mr. Nauman question, do we have the authority to change the numbers from the fiscal note if we think they're incorrect?
Director Larson. Oh, Mr. Norman.
I was unclear, Mr. Chair, if that question was addressed to me by Senator Pratt or if he was asking Director Larson.
Go ahead.
I can
Whoever's got the answer, Mr. Nauman.
I can answer generally, and I think Director Larson spoke to this earlier. We have a custom and practice of fully funding formula-driven or forecasted programs. And so the flexibility in budget rules and by our custom and practice is to fully fund any forecasted program. You can't undershoot on a formula and pretend that the cost isn't there. I think there's a lot more flexibility on items that are fiscal noted for things like an expense at an agency, where the agency has said, here's how much it costs for a particular responsibility that the legislature is about to give the agency. The legislature in its wisdom can choose to spend more or less based on whatever value judgments the legislature chooses to make. Similar to grant programs or the administration of a grant program. I think it's up to the legislature to make decisions about that, regardless of what the fiscal note says.
For the response, Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, I am talking about the non-forecasted. I think the forecasted formula-driven stuff we haven't had a problem with, but there has been a decline over the years in the credibility of the fiscal notes that we've been getting. And you know, Mr. Larson, we've talked, and I would be interested in any recommendations that we could use to give the LBO more teeth in the process. It's been, it's been frustrating when you see an agency sometimes make an assumption. Sometimes they say, well, we can't make an assumption, so there's no fiscal cost, and we know there is one. And so we either have to empower the LBO to have more authority to push back, or we as a legislature have to exert our authority. And I know that we hit deadlines and there are pressures to get legislation through, especially legislation that's important to the majority caucus, whoever's in the majority. I don't mean that pejoratively, Senator Marty. Because we had the same conversation when Senator Rosen was chair of the Finance Committee, and I think we just have to do a better job of holding the executive branch accountable for their estimates and pushing back when we think they're unreasonable. And I can think of several conversations. In fact, in our minutes, back in 2023, the last time we met, Representative Elkins had made that very same recommendation. So, Mr. Chair, I look forward to working with you and Mr. Larson to try to figure out how we as a legislature and we as a legislative team, including the LBO, can do a better job of making sure that the fiscal notes we're getting are credible and that we actually exert our power as a co-equal branch to ensure that we're getting the best information we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm new to the commission, of course, and just sort of thinking this through. I guess I'm trying to just understand Senator Pratt's points. And maybe Mr. Nauer and Ms. Adrians can help me with this, that beyond forecasted programs, I understand the fiscal notes, are ultimately advisory to the legislature. They inform us as to what the administration thinks the cost is. Of course, if we pass a bill that is wildly out of cost, I guess then in the administration's view, the governor could potentially veto it. But it's sort of part of the balance between the branches as opposed to being something that is in fact gospel. But maybe Ms. Adrians, you can help me just to understand how to think about a fiscal note that we receive as it goes through the budget process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Pinto. Just like my colleagues have mentioned, we don't consider fiscal notes to be binding. We think of them as advisory. And we do hope that you take them, we want to take them seriously. We want to believe the agencies, but they are advisory. And so you always run the risk if the legislature decides not to fund a program that an agency has suggested would have a cost, the agency might not be able to implement that program because they did tell you that there was cost. But yes, we do think of them as advisory.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and so I guess I guess I'm just not certain about Senator Pratt's point. And Senator Pratt, I maybe want to talk with you more separately. Maybe there's more examples you can give of the idea of the credibility of fiscal notes having dropped. I will say I can definitely, the testifier and I have worked together in a couple of fiscal notes where agency has come back and I've pushed back pretty hard on the agency and gone back and forth. I think we've probably all done that. Maybe the credibility has dropped. I don't know that that's been my experience exactly. We've had the LBO get put into place since I've been in the legislature. So we've actually got an extra team in our corner, so to speak. I guess I too am interested in whatever suggestions certainly the LBO would have for us as we're engaging with the administration. And I'd be interested to sort of be more aware of examples of where my colleagues think the credibility has dropped. Ultimately, I guess my thinking is this is part of the back and forth between the branches, and ultimately they're advisory. We do with them what we do, and we do run the risk of a program not being funded. Or again, an example of a governor saying, look, this goes too far. But I will say I can think of examples where folks have been pushing to have a fiscal note done where I've said yeah, I see the agency's point. I don't understand how they could make assumptions that could make any sense of what you're asking for. That's just my opinion, right? We're all different opinions. So it's kind of a balancing process. I guess I just don't know that I fully am on board at this point with the idea that the credibility is dropping and that puts us in a major disadvantage vis-a-vis the administration. But this is my first meeting, so there'll be an ongoing conversation about it, I'm sure. Thank you, Chair.
Did you have any comments, Director Lassen, or we can move to the next?
No, certainly happy to always continue to talk about how to strengthen the fiscal process, make sure that we're meeting the expectations and standards set for fiscal notes.
I don't see any further questions from the members. Please proceed to the next section and introduce yourself again for the record, then proceed, please.
And Amanda will pull up the second set of slides. Thank you. Again, for the record, my name is Christian Larson, the Director of the Legislative Budget Office. And so now we will be walking through just kind of some updates on the office. We'll walk through kind of the administrative side, so our budget and our staffing plan. We'll look at a brief discussion of fiscal note activity over the last several years. We'll talk about local impact note activity and kind of what that means for resources in the office. And we'll talk about our work in supporting the Tax Measure Review Commission. So that's kind of the rest of this presentation. Next slide. And one more. All right. So when we think about the LBO budget, we really think about the two sides of it, the sources and the uses. Our sources really have three main sources. The first of those being the general fund appropriation. That's set in the State Government Committee, and that's funding both for the fiscal note general operations side of our office and the Tax Measure Review Commission side of the office. And so there was appropriations that came to our office at different times to support those different pieces, and that's all now in one appropriation that we received through the State Government Committee. We also have a statutory appropriation of $207,000 annually to support the local impact note process. And then we have access to a carry forward fund. So legislative offices have carry forward funds. So if we don't spend money at the end, or if we have remaining funds at the end of the biennium, that rolls forward into the next biennium, and we have access to those funds to use in for certain things. In terms of uses, 85 to 95% of our expenses historically have come from employee compensation. That was the case this past year. It has historically been how we have operated in our 6+ years of existence. We also have an annual expense for the fiscal note tracking system. So we mentioned that earlier. That's that technology solution that facilitates the fiscal note process. Minnesota Management Budget developed that software before we existed. They were using that software. We adopted that as part of the fiscal note process when we were created, and we've continued to use that. And so we lease that from MMB on an annual lease, and we also pay for upgrades if we're going to do that. And so there's an annual expense for that. And then you'll also see when we get to the slide on that actually has some numbers in it, we have an expected increase in the contracted services that we have for the office, and that's really mostly related to the Tax Measure Review Commission work. We have the authority to contract out some of those evaluations, and we've started to do that. We didn't have that before, and so you can see there's no cost there, but moving forward, we have some costs. We're also starting to look at the fiscal tracking system and say, is there ways to upgrade or replace that system moving forward? And so we expect to have some contracted costs associated with that. So that's kind of the sources and uses. And Amanda, if you can go to the next slide.
Director Lassen, just a quick question on the systems, the fiscal note system. How, have you evaluated how other states are using the different systems? Are we still good using the current system? I know we had discussion about upgrading it.
Chair Norwood, thank you for the question. So it's very varied. So we do ask when we meet with other states stuff, we ask like what they're doing. There's very kind of manual processes all the way to we're probably on the more technology advanced side of having a system developed. There is user side challenges at times that inputting and interacting with the system are the word processing system used to develop fiscal notes is challenging. It's not, I think for the user side, it can be frustrating. And so there's things for us to think about from upgrading from that standpoint. At the same time, there is a lot of functionality in terms of the automated emails and things getting notified right away. When a fiscal note is completed, it gets distributed out immediately. So it handles a lot of the things we need, but it also has some challenges. And so I think it's something for us to explore and say, how do we look at this? I think there's also a conversation to be had and how it interacts with other systems within the legislature. I think about the revisor's office and things of that nature. We certainly, there's a world where we're using similar data points, right? And so if we can tap into that, that might make sense, but we're a long way from knowing what that could look like. That's kind of where we'd like to go in the future and say, like, what are we accomplishing now? What are the needs? And what's possible in the future? Is that maybe the system currently we have is really the best answer, but maybe there's systems to look at and say, we can do this a little bit better.
if we plan to do some upgrade, because you're leasing from MMB, who's responsible for requesting those upgrades or changes?
So we have an annual process, I'm sorry, Chair Norton.
Derek Lesson. Go ahead.
So we have an annual process where we go, so we have an annual lease of about $50,000 for the system itself. And then we also pay for upgrades. So there's some basic maintenance in that agreement. And then if we want to make some upgrades, we go through and we process and make requests for that. We submit to MMB, like, here's a list of things we'd like to do. MMB reviews it and says, like, here's what we think we can accomplish in this interim. And then we move forward and say, okay, let's prioritize those. It's going to cost us much. We'll make a decision on what to do with that. And so that's kind of an annual process we have. If we want to make some major upgrades, I think we'd have to plan a few years out so that they could plan with us about how to make sure there's resources available and things of that nature with more substantial upgrades.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Just wait till the slide pulls up here. All right, so just briefly, this is a really high level summary of our budget. If you want to see a little bit more detailed expense budget, we have that listed at the end of the slides. It's kind of an appendix, so you feel free to look at that and I can respond to questions on either. But generally, we have our sources. Again, we have about $5.765 million in general fund appropriations over the next biennium. And then we have that $207,000 annual statutory appropriation for $414,000 over the biennium, leading to $6.179 million appropriation for our office for the biennium. You can see we're rolling in $2.674 million into carry forward, and we're expecting that to grow modestly over the next couple of years. In terms of our expenses, we have, again, compensation is our biggest piece, about $5.1 million in compensation over the biennium. The fiscal note tracking system is about $70,000 per year, depending on how many upgrades we request. And then we have those contracted services we talked about. So last year we saw we didn't have any expense for that. This year we already have a contract in place for one tax expenditure evaluation. We'll likely go out for another at some point this year. And then in FY27, we're talking about continuing on some tax expenditure evaluation work, but also looking at bringing someone in to kind of review that technology solution. We're looking at the fiscal tracking system with us. So that's kind of that piece of it. And then all our expenses are around $125,000 per year budgeted at, so about $250,000 over the biennium. Amanda, next slide. Again, the biggest piece of our office in terms of expenses is really on that staffing side. We are budgeted for 19 FTE. That includes a director, a deputy director, coordinator, and system analyst, and those kind of our administrative management positions help kind of manage the entire office, make sure that we're handling things in that regard. We have 4 lead analysts that help lead the different aspects of our work. So we have 2 fiscal note related lead analysts. We have a lead analyst that supports our local impact note and fiscal note writing for new entities. We have a lead analyst for that. And then we have a lead analyst that supports our tax expense review commission work. We have 7 budget analysts. Currently, there's 1 vacancy that we're looking to fill this fall in preparation of the coming session. We added an economist just a couple of months ago. So the economist was really part as the tax expense review commission came on. We identified needing to be able to perform some more kind of causal type of analysis, some econometric type of analysis. So we brought in someone with special skills to do that. And then we have 3 program evaluators that support the tax expense review commission work. During session, we have about 10 or 11 staff strictly assigned to fiscal note work, depending on how you divvy up the work in our office. And then we have 4 staff that are consistently going to work on tax expense review commission work throughout the year. And so we don't have, there's enough tax expense review commission work to make sure that we need to make sure there's staff assigned to that all year. And we were budgeted for that when that commission was created. And so we have staff work on that. And then we have the interim when we're more flexible. And so more people move over to tax expense review commission work in the interim, just making sure we're managing those duties that we have of our office and make sure we're meeting those statutory obligations. Next slide. So now we'll kind of talk about just the fiscal note related activity. The first big question is how many. The gray bars that you see on the screen are the number of requests in in a regular session. And we're just looking at regular session because that really gives us the best apples to apples comparison. Occasionally have a year with there's a bunch of special sessions or something like that kind of changes things. But really, if we think about when our resources get stretched, when agency and other state entities' resources get stretched around the fiscal note process, it's during that legislative process. And 95 to 99% of fiscal note requests come in during the regular session. So that's what we're focusing on in these slides. So The gray bars are the fiscal note requests. You can see about 1,000 fiscal note requests come in an operating budget year and in an odd number year. We had that spike in 2023 where we had 1,400 requests. That's the highest that we've seen in the data that we have for the fiscal note tracking system. But 1,000 is kind of what we think is a normal year if such a thing exists. In a non-operating budget year, you have something between 600 and we had up to 1,000 in 2024, but between 600 and 1,000 fiscal note requests in a non-operating budget year. Generally about 60 to 70% of fiscal note requests get completed. There's a lot of things that goes into why a note gets completed or not, but generally between 60 and 70% historically have been completed. Next slide, Amanda. So I think the best way to think about this in terms of workload for the office is kind of the next two slides, including this one. And so if we think about it as a per day of session, if we really want to see apples to apples comparison, I think this is a really good way for us to think about it. Generally historically, even beyond this chart, 7 to 7.5% fiscal note requests per day of session come in. That's like what we could consider a normal year. You see in 23 and 24, we had a spike to 10 and 11.5. And this last year that came down a little bit to 8.5. So we're still high a little bit on the end of number of requests per day of session. But that came down a little bit over after kind of a really big spike the previous two sessions. And then in terms of completions, historically an average amount is between 5 and 5.5%. So again, you see in 21 and 22 around 5. This last year 5.4. That's kind of in that normal range. In 23 and 24, about 7 fiscal notes would be completed per day of session. So that's pretty high output relative to historics. So that I think is a concept of how much is happening in the office. And if we think really how much resources are being asked of agencies with the fiscal note process, and we think about why are things happening at certain times, these are the things that kind of speak to us when things get stretched. Next slide. And those are all like fiscal note request as a single unit. When we think about workload in our office and workload overall for agencies and those assigned to fiscal notes, it's this gold bar that we really need to talk about. And that's how we think about things internally. So when we talk about external things, we're really talking about how many notes are there, requests, how many are completed. But if we're thinking about internal workload, it's these gold bars, and this is the agency assignments. So each fiscal note might turn into 2 or 3 agency assignments. How many agencies are going to be assigned to that fiscal note to get to completion? So historically, there's been a ratio of about 2 to 1 fiscal notes request, or 2 fiscal note assignments for every assignment for every request, fiscal note request. The last couple of years, that's grown. We've seen some more comprehensive or complex bills come through. This last year, we had a 3 to 1 ratio, which is again pretty high. So although we were down in the total number of requests around 1,000, we had 3,000 agency assignments, and that is it's not the highest what we saw in 2023, but that's pretty historically very high. And so again, a lot of work flowing through the fiscal note process. We'll go next slide, Amanda. Thank you. And then we think about not the last thing we measure. There's a lot of things we measure, but in terms of what we'll talk about today, really a lot of, we always talk about accuracy. Certainly like the 2 big things are accurate and timely, right? Those are the 2 kind of things that need to come out of the fiscal note process. Is information flowing on a good time? And is it good, solid, accurate information? Timeliness can be challenging to measure. There's a lot of different things to think about. Timeliness, is it completed by the time a hearing is? Is it completed by a time that's set as a due date in the fiscal note tracking system? Is it completed in a certain number of days? So that whatever it might be, there's different ways to think about timeliness. The easiest one we have to measure, and the one that we have most access to data to, is completed by the assigned due date in the fiscal note tracking system. The fiscal note tracking system has a default due date of 8 business days. So you think about 10 calendar days, depending on when that request goes in. And we've seen historically, since the LBO has taken over, about 45 to 50% notes completed by the assigned due date. And that assigned due date can be reduced or increased by the person making the request. And so if this is going to be heard in 3 days, I need to make the request. Now we can set an assigned due date of 3 days. We know this one's going to be more complex note. We're going to set a month or whatever it might be. That can be changed. But generally, the vast majority of notes have this 8 business days due date. So again, between 45 and 50% in the LBO's history of notes completed by the due date. This last year that dipped down to 39%. Again, probably that prior slide explains some of that, of just that number of complex bills, number of agencies assigned to each note probably helps determine that a little bit. But I think that's something for us to continue to think about, discuss, and see, is this a trend? Is this something else? Next slide, Amanda. So that was really the discussion around fiscal note data. We can certainly come back to that and answer any questions that members have. To talk about local impact notes, again, answer the question, what's the fiscal effect to local units of government? This is a vastly different process like we talked about a few moments ago. And it's also the volume is very different. So where we have around 1,000 fiscal note requests in an operating budget year, for fiscal notes, we have somewhere between 0 and 5 local impact note requests since we've been created, since the LBO took over the process in 2020. So this last year we had 1 request. Before that, we had 5 in 2023, 4 in 2024. And so it's variable. And those are more resource intensive programs or it's more resource products for us. Again, we're the ones collecting data, developing that data, analyzing the data, and putting together analysis. And then the access to that data is very different. So it's possible we have publicly available data regarding a topic. And in those cases, a note takes somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks. And that, I would say that's normal. I'd say that's happened when we've like, okay, here's a really good data set. We can make an estimate on that. We can turn that around in about a month. Most of the time they take somewhere between 2 and 8 months, depending on the level of complexity of the local impact note and kind of the time of year that request comes in. We traditionally see these local impact requests come in on more complex bills. We think paid family medical leave, legalization of adult use cannabis, things of that. Those are the type of notes that generally come in on for local impact notes. And so they're relatively complex questions. And oftentimes we're going to local units of government and surveying those local units of government, saying, how is this impacting you? So you can imagine reaching out to cities, counties, school districts, collecting all that information, going through and trying to come up with a synthesized estimate, take some time. And so that's really how that process has developed. And it doesn't always operate on the same calendar as the legislative process. Oftentimes those fall into the interim, go into the interim, and we'll complete that analysis at, sometime in the interim. And we often, I guess I should mention this so we don't lose sight of that. We also partner with representative organizations, think the League of Minnesota Cities, Association of Minnesota Counties, representative organizations for school districts, and to help kind of either make connections with local units of government or have them help us kind of collect data and things of that nature. So that's kind of the local impact note process in a nutshell. And then, Amanda, you want to go to the next slide? The last piece of our office is really supporting that Tax Expenditure Review Commission. And the Tax Expenditure Review Commission is charged with evaluating tax expenditures effectiveness and fiscal impact for all tax expenditures on the books in Minnesota. The Tax Expenditure Review Commission was created in 2021. It was started meeting in 2022 and has been meeting on somewhat of a regular basis since that time. Statute has been updated a couple of times since it was first created. A report to the legislature is required by February 15th of each year. And if you have interest in kind of what the output of project of those looks like, you certainly can find the link here and find those reports. But there is going to be a transition as we kind of move beyond. You can go to the next slide, Amanda. There's two phases this works. So we're moving through this first phase, and now we're starting kind of the second phase. And so the evaluations and what they look like are changing, and kind of the resources required are changing. So we'll talk about that now. So again, the Tax Expenditure Review Commission work really has 2 phases: the initial review and the full evaluation and full review. The initial review is really the commission going through and defining an objective for each tax expenditure. We have about 330 tax expenditures on the books in Minnesota. So it's going through and having staff from the legislative budget office review the legislative record, do literature review of academic or industry research, and say, what would this policy try to be accomplished? And so we bring that forward, we present that to the commission, and they go forward and say, yes, that's it, or it's not, and we really think it's doing this. And so then the commission will again approve an objective statement. Once the objective is identified, then they come back to the legislative budget office and say, please go and do an evaluation of that. And so then it's collecting data, doing a deeper literature review, reviewing the similar statute in other states, similar programs that might be a direct spend program as opposed to tax expenditure. So it's a pretty rich analysis that results in a report of somewhere between 5 and 40 pages most of the time. And these take generally between 2 and 12 months. They're pretty deep and rich analysis, and that this is what we're learning from other states. And then as we take them on, this is what we found as well. You want to go to the next slide there, Amanda? So in terms of the workload for the office, so for the commission to kind of understand what the office is undertaking. So again, we have about 330 tax expenditures on the books currently. 45 have gone through that initial review process and have objective statements approved. That means there's 282 still to go through that process. Now, internally, we have probably 140 that are ready for the commission. So we've done a fair amount of work on this initial review phase. We're hoping to kind of get through this, much of it, the rest of those 140 by the end of this interim. So we have all those kind of ready and to pull and provide to the commission when that's ready. But it's been a fair amount of work since, again, 2022, of a lot of legislative research. Next slide, Amanda. And so then we go into that next phase, which is that full evaluation phase. So if you think about the 45 that approved for full evaluation, that really is enough to get us through the next 2 years in terms of what we're capable of doing and providing to the commission in terms of full evaluations. Of the 45 that are ready for full evaluation, we've touched 31. It's in somewhere in the process. We have some that are near completion. We have some that are kind of at a midpoint review phase we have, and then some that we've just started literature review or whatever else it might be. And again, to kind of think about what this means in terms of work for the office, just to be clear, the 31 tax expenditure evaluations in progress does not necessarily mean that results in 31 different reports. We're able to bundle some of these if they have a similar objective, if they have a similar constituency group, whatever else it might be. So I think the 31 that are somewhere in the progress of evaluation, we're looking at 15 to 16 actual reports being produced by the office, which then will be presented to the by the Tax Review Commission. And then they will include that in their final report and make recommendations to the legislature based on some of the findings that we provide to them. And so that kind of takes us through the major work of the office. And so from there, I'm happy to kind of pause, go back through any of the information you provided or talk about anything in the office and what's going on the last several years.
Thank you so much, Director Larson. One quick question: when fiscal note is supposed to be completed by multiple agencies, how do you really track in terms of the timelines and everything else when it involves different agencies at the same time?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the coordination of fiscal notes is certainly part of the process that we have. And if you go through the Uniform Standards Procedure, it talks about how the different roles and what the LBO's role is in that. And we do work to make sure that, so the fiscal note gets assigned to all the agencies. The goal is every time that the fiscal note is, as soon as we receive it, that day that goes out to the agency, that we're hitting all the agencies impacted. There's times it's possible we're missing an agency that the way the bills are, we were not fully sure that, oh, that agency is impacted. So it's possible we catch one late, quite honestly, and say like, oh, the agency identified this interaction. Okay, now we're going to assign that agency. The vast majority of the time, that's not the case. The vast majority of the time, we're going to find the agencies that are impacted, we'll assign them. And so they have that right away. When we know that there's a complex note, we try to reach out to the agencies and make sure that communication is happening within the agencies, that assumptions are being shared. If there's one agency that really is going to drive other assumptions within agencies, we try to be aware of that and communicate that as well. It's something that we've tried to make investments in the last 2 years, in particular of being really proactive and making sure that the communication is taking place. I would say in a lot of ways that's been productive, that we've seen progress in that capacity. But those are the ones that tend to be more challenging and take more time, that when you are coordinating across multiple agencies, one, we need to make sure that the assumptions match, that there's not different assumptions at different agencies, and that we have a good sense that this is how that's going to flow. And if it's going to hit a bunch of different agencies, that it's just going to take a little more time to understand and make sure that that is kind of the best way for that to be kind of approached, and say that is a reasonable way for that to be implemented.
Thank you, Director Larson. Could you remind us of the classification of fiscal notes and how are they classified and how many of each do you receive in total?
Yes, Chair Noor. So there is 3 different classifications of fiscal notes. The vast majority of fiscal notes come in as regular fiscal notes. A regular fiscal note is just a fiscal note requested, again, on behalf of a chair from a finance committee that is on legislation that can be acted on by the legislature. It's an introduced piece of legislation or amendment. And that represents generally about 95% of all fiscal note requests. It changes depending on the year, but somewhere around that 90 to 95% range. About 95% is pretty standard. We also have classified unofficial fiscal notes and unofficial fiscal notes. Classified unofficial fiscal notes and unofficial fiscal notes can be requested by any member of the legislature. So that doesn't have to go through the chair of a finance committee. Unofficial fiscal notes and classified unofficial notes are on legislation that's draft legislation. And that's really the main difference. Otherwise, unofficial fiscal notes handled very similar to a regular fiscal note. It's just on draft legislation and then who can request it. Classified unofficial fiscal notes are different. That data is private data to the requester. So the member who's coming forward and saying, I want to request on this piece of legislation, that's classified data and private data and cannot be shared outside of the people involved in the process. And so certainly the person who made the request, the member who made the request, the fiscal analyst who's making the request on their behalf, the fiscal staff within the legislative budget office who's assigning that note and doing a review of that note, and then the agency staff assigned to that note. That's the people who have access to that information. Beyond that, it should be private data. When that information when a fiscal note is completed, that's classified, it then is only distributed to the fiscal analyst who made the request, who then will pass it on to the member. And that's a very closed loop. Otherwise, there's generally a lot of people that can see fiscal notes, and obviously when they're completed, they're public. A classified fiscal note is not. And again, that can be made on behalf of any member and then is considered classified data. Once that language that the note is built on, or when, if we have that language that note was created for, gets introduced or gets even kind of suggested in a committee or somehow has been open to the public, then that becomes a public document. It's no longer classified, but that's the trigger. It has to be kind of considered by the legislature in some capacity.
Any further questions from the members?
Mr. Chair,
Senator Pratt.
thank you. And maybe I missed this in the presentation. I noticed a discrepancy between the fiscal notes that were requested and the fiscal notes completed, and maybe why that happens again.
Director Lesson.
Chair Norton, Senator Pratt. Yeah, so there's a lot of reasons the fiscal note doesn't get completed. The vast majority that don't complete is because they are inactivated. So maybe a bill got amended, and so the new request comes in. And then sometimes it just is a prioritization issue that at some point in session, an agency is going to be stretched too thin, and say we start to have to prioritizing, and then it becomes by the end of session, okay, is that still needed? If not, then it gets inactivated and things of that nature. There's also times where we are not in agreement with the agency on what the assumptions should be. And so we're working with the agency, and we get to a point where we say we don't agree with the assumptions provided. It's rare, but it might become kind of a stalemate and say, no, that is what we think. And so the result is that the fiscal note may not flow. Now, the vast majority of time we can get to some kind of solution to that, but there are times when we have disagreement with agencies. And so that can also uphold our approval of fiscal note. And those are kind of the three main reasons for a fiscal note not to be completed.
There are instances whereby a bill can be added to another bill, so it goes into a different section rather than the requested fiscal note.
I'm sorry, Chair Norton. Yes, that's right. So anytime a bill gets changed, it might be that the fiscal analyst goes back and changes that request to make sure it's the most up-to-date language being acted upon.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Mr. Larson, if we have a bill that a fiscal note's been, let's even say completed, and the bill gets amended in such a way that it might increase the cost, is that considered a new fiscal note request?
Director Lusk.
Chair Norton, Senator Pratt, that's correct. So every time, it's a manual process. It's not an automatic thing. So let's say a bill gets amended. Let's say a fiscal note's been requested on a bill, whether it's complete or not, and a bill gets amended. There's not an automatic process that automatically updates that request and says that's going to be replaced. It's a manual process. So fiscal analysts and fiscal staff will go in and say, I need a new request on this new language. It's not automated in any way. It really is a manual process, but generally that's what happens. So a new language gets introduced. That old fiscal note, if it was completed, still exists and still is out there. It doesn't get overwritten. It just exists on an old version. A new version is requested, and then that will be then worked upon and hopefully completed.
Okay.
Senator
Thank you.
Pratt.
Nope.
So for that instance, is that fiscal note counted as once or twice, or depending on the number of times that it has been amended?
Chair Norton, that is, each one is its own count. So it'll count each one. So if we have 4 versions of a bill that gets requested, that'll count as 4 fiscal note requests. And then each one will independently be completed or not completed. And so that in terms of how it adds to the estimates. In the same way, the agency assignments would be counted every time. So let's say we have a really complex bill with 15 agencies assigned. It gets introduced and then it doesn't get completed, it gets amended. Those 15 agency assignments count towards the agency assignments in those gold bars you see. And then that would be stacked on another 15 because it's technically counts as a new fiscal note request.
Thank you. Any other question? Hearing none, I think we will proceed and move to the next agenda items. I think we have a few other things to consider. I think for future meetings, we will plan hopefully to have 2 meetings before session, hopefully. If we can get it done, I will be in touch with the members and ex officios to determine what is the best timeline. And we will reach out to everyone. I think we have a lot of future discussions on how fiscal notes handled between the agency and the LBO. We would like to get more clarity on that process. And so please stay tuned on that. We do have a public member who wanted to testify today. Mr. Berg, please introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Josh Berg. and-
Mr. Berg, I apologize. Can you actually slide over to the other computer?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. For the record, my name is Josh Berg, and I work for a nonprofit based here in St. Paul that provides affordable, accessible housing and supports for individuals with disabilities. I also have the honor of serving on several boards and working alongside many of you in an effort to improve our systems of care across Minnesota. For additional context, I also serve as a city council member of Elka New Market, arguably the best city in Scott County. My apologies, Vice Chair Pratt, and currently chair the Economic Development Authority, in which former Representative Bob Vogel also serves. As many of you know, Representative Vogel was instrumental in the creation of the LBO, and the conversations he and I have had recently have reinforced my desire to get in front of you today. I want to begin with a broader observation that's been reinforced through recent national conferences and policy roundtables I've been a part of. Minnesota is falling behind. We have long considered ourselves a leader, innovative in governance, compassionate in-service care, in-service delivery, and a model for other states. But in several key areas, especially in how we develop, implement, and sustain services for people with disabilities and older adults, that reputation no longer holds. And critically, our state agencies are increasingly out of sync with the reality and day-to-day operations of the organizations that are doing the work on the ground. Additionally, other states, all on different sides of the political spectrum, including Montana, California, Texas, New York, Maryland, and Virginia, are modernizing their fiscal tools, integrating dynamic modeling, refining cost projections, and building more responsive budgeting systems. This is another area where Minnesota is not leading, and it's time that we consider changing that. Our current fiscal note process is solid. It estimates upfront costs based on current law and static assumptions, but it doesn't always capture the full picture, especially when it comes to long-term savings or how people and systems respond to policy changes. And that's not a flaw, it's just a limitation of the tool. Dynamic budgeting adds the layers we are missing. It allows us to model not just costs, but potential savings and behavioral shifts. It's not about replacing fiscal notes, it's about enhancing them. And it's not about perfection either. Just like we already make educated assumptions to estimate cost, dynamic modeling helps us make informed projections about future impacts. We already do this in other areas, whether it's estimated enrollment trends, utilization rates, or inflationary effects. This is simply the next step. And here's the part that resonates, especially with the business-minded side of this conversation. Corporations do this every day. In the private sector, dynamic forecasting is standard practice. It is expected. Businesses adjust budgets in real time, respond to market shifts, and anticipate consumer behavior. They don't wait for perfect data. They iterate, refine, and adapt. We can and should do the same in public finance. In fact, we already have a strong candidate for a pilot, the community care hub legislation we proposed over the last couple sessions. It's a perfect example of a program where dynamic modeling based on data-driven evidence, research, and real-world application across the country could help us better understand not just the upfront investment, but the long-term cost savings through reduced emergency visits, improved care coordination, and better health outcomes. It's a program designed to change behavior and reduce downstream costs. So let's model that. Let's show what's possible when we budget with the full picture in mind. This is especially urgent now, given the changing federal landscape. As you all know, the 2025 Federal Reconciliation Bill includes sweeping Medicaid reforms that will significantly impact Minnesota. These changes are projected to result in a loss of coverage for up to 250,000 Minnesotans and a reduction of $1.4 billion annually in federal funding. This is not a political statement, it is a factual reality. These shifts will strain our state budget, increase uncompensated care, and disproportionately affect low-income adults, rural hospitals, and people with disabilities. In this context, our budgeting tools must also evolve. Static models won't be enough to navigate the volatility ahead. By integrating dynamic modeling, we increase transparency, improve planning, and make smarter decisions for Minnesotans. It's a natural evolution of the tools we already trust, and a chance for Minnesota to lead again. Thank you for your time, and I urge this committee to consider adding this topic, dynamic modeling and fiscal modernization, to future meetings and discussions, and to direct the LBO to bring back possible recommendations related to this topic. It's not just a technical upgrade, it's a strategic necessity. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I think we have got a question from Mr. Norman.
Mr. Chair, just a little bit of clarification. I did not hear where the testifier was from. I heard Elko New Market, and I think you said you were a city council member there, but I didn't hear the other organization. Maybe you can help us with that, because I think that might be pertinent to your testimony.
Sure, certainly.
Please reintroduce yourself.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Nauman. So I work for a nonprofit based in St. Paul. We do affordable, accessible housing for individuals with disabilities, seniors, veterans across the country and here in Minnesota. So we do a lot of work in the human services space, do a lot of work with Chair Knorr, Chair and Schumacher, and Representative Schumacher and Senator Hoffman here in the Senate. I also am on the board of Trellis and Juniper, and on the Trellis, which is the Metro Area Agency on Aging here in the Metro. I am on the board of ARM and others.
And Mr. Chair, with your permission, can you tell us the name of the organization in St. Paul you were citing?
Accessible Space, Inc.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Mudd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mr. Berg, I think you said, yes, this is very helpful. I think we should be discussing this. I would like to just second that this is a topic I hope the LBOOC can take a look at, because it is, as he said, not a replacement for what we're doing now, but factoring in new things, reflecting the complexity of how the budgets work. So I'd encourage the LBOOC to take a deeper dive into this. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Mudd. Any other question for the testifier? Appreciate you bringing the dynamic budgeting to us. I think there's more conversation that is needed. Any other statement or note? So members, stay tuned. I'll be in touch with you individually, and also reach out to the ex-official members to figure out when we can reconvene. And so I appreciate you being here today. With that, we don't have any further agenda items. We are now adjourned.